Hi, everybody. It's Kristena with Kristena West Art and Healing. It's like something deep in the world, soul is shaking from politics to the planet. If you're feeling unsettled, disconnected, even shattered, you're not alone. Today, we're talking about what mystics call the dark night of the soul and how it might just be the beginning of our planetary awakening. Maybe it's time for all of us to take this deep dive together. Our theme today is the dark night of the soul. When the light disappears, the path to awakening begins. So, hi, friends. Today is the third episode in the series of thought forms, art and healing. If you don't know what the dark night of the soul is, let me give a quick overview. It is actually a human experience. Every human being will experience at some point in their life a dark night of the soul. Some of us call it a personal crisis, a deep depression, a dismemberment. In shamanic terms, it's called a dismemberment. But the dark night of the soul is a period of profound personal crisis, often marked by a period of existential questioning and feeling untethered from life. It can be fraught with emotional turmoil, meltdowns. It's a time when long held beliefs and values, and even our identities, can feel like they're unraveling and do unravel. And here in the USA, in what's happening is moving out over the entire world, the entire planet, through this tremendous disturbance, has created actually what I consider to be a spiritual awakening. And I would call that in Western mystery traditions or shamanic traditions or even traditions of religion, an awakening of conscience. And this is not a small thing. This is a fabulous thing. The awakening of conscience is a deep spiritual transformation, and it happens in many ways, and it doesn't happen just one way. When our conscience awakens, it's as if we awaken to a higher state in our heart, but also in our mind. And it feels like a fire, like a creative fire of will when our conscience awakens for many people. But we are all feeling collectively, I think, this deep turmoil and a sense of not just personal, but collective crises. And these bring on feelings of confusion and despair and sadness and grief. And while this experience may be challenging, it is viewed cross-culturally all over the world as the necessary step for personal transformation. And if we're doing this collectively, global transformation. So stay with me. We're going deep. Across time and culture, every human being meets their dark night of the soul. And I want you to pay attention to this because in shamanic traditions, it's called a dismemberment. And it's called a dismemberment. It's so that the earth can remember us as our authentic soul and spirit, can remember us rightly, correctly, lawfully in our original essence. So a dismemberment or a dark night of the soul is the crucial step to leap from old, outworn, solidified, default, limiting, self-limiting patterns to a new self. Okay, so exciting. So the thing is, I know this like the back of my hand about dismemberments. I've taught this since the 90s in my men and women's groups, but I have written a book on it and I want to read to you because I can't remember it all. So please forgive me as I read to you one of the experiences from my men's group. So you'll see me reading. This is from my book, Alchemy, the Magical Arts of the Union of Soul. And this is from the men's class, and the men's class was called Journey to the Sacred Male. I think I should probably tell you that I'm considered by Native American traditions to be a twin spirit person. And that means that I have the gift of teaching both men and women. In the 90s, I started teaching two groups, a men's group called Journey to the Sacred Male and a women's group called Women's Spirit. And we met every week for 3 hours Tuesdays was the women's, Thursdays was the men's, and then every other week we'd bring the two groups together, the men and women's groups, because we were working on gender reconciliation and shadow work and personal development. So that's just to help you understand we were doing deep dives using this shamanic journey to gather information. One of the gifts that I have, according to Native American traditions, is I can teach men and women without bias. I'm called a twin spirit person or a gatekeeper by Malidoma Samay, who is a teacher of mine. So that hopefully sets to rest my politically incorrectness of teaching men and women's groups, bringing in a shamanic spiritual gift that I actually carry, and many people carry, by the way. The men's class, Journey to the Sacred Male, we opened up the discussion among men of what it means to be a man in today's changing society. The men mainly are relieved to let down the pretense that they have erected around themselves regarding who they are as men. With the class focus developing a spiritual practice, many men experience their first communication with spiritual beings. And I use the shamanic journey and dream work. They get dream work the first week in any class that I teach. So they were learning to incubate a dream and ask for a dream, working on their own personal development issues, whatever that was. They would not only work on bringing a dream to class, but also, they learned the shamanic journey, which they loved. So speaking and working directly with spiritual beings for the men opened up new worlds of beauty, delight, and adventure. For many, this class was the first time that they developed a personal spiritual discipline. The spiritual world, or the spirits, the helping spirits, began to come into the men's dreams. Some experienced mystical phenomena. At one point or another, the men began to realize that what they were experiencing was real. This realization sent shockwaves into their worldview and challenged it, which is all part of waking up, isn't it? This is one of the first struggles, to accept spiritual reality and spiritual happenings as actually a valid part of a human experience that has validity. And so they started slowly waking up to this realization that the world wasn't what they thought it was, meaning a scientific worldview. And this is wonderful to watch. And I call it the popcorn motif, when people are just popping right and left, depending on how hot their interior world was getting with their personal transformation. This story is so heartwarming. One of the men, had undergone a spiritual crisis at 19 while studying to be a priest. He discovered that the priests were having sexual relations and that this was acceptable behavior, but hidden under the church's cloak of secrecy and denial. And remember, I was teaching this in the 90s, and the church's revelation of the hidden abuse hadn't really hit the world. We didn't have social media at that time. He discovered that the priests were having sexual relations with each other and that this was acceptable behavior, but hidden under the church's cloak of secrecy and denial. And he was shattered. And that night he left the seminary and he spent the night in a church graveyard. And he experienced a profound crisis. The entire night he saw and heard the spirits all night long. He was lying with his back against a huge tree and was assaulted with loud voices and visions all night through. He said later that he felt that tree was the only reason that he lived through the night. When the morning dawned, the supernatural phenomena dissolved. He got up and he staggered toward the graveyard gates, where he saw two nuns sitting on a bench, gazing up at him. They had extraordinary blue eyes. He felt a jolt of power and fear course through his body, and he left hurriedly. He found out later that the graveyard was a nun's graveyard. And since he was in an all-male seminary, it was impossible for him to see two nuns that morning. So this experience shook up his worldview so much he pushed it deep down. That's called denial. And when we push something down like that, that's when we split. You know what? We develop a persona that the world sees, but we're splitting our shadow, the thing that we can't face, down. And sometimes that's a safety mechanism to bring that up later when we can deal with it, which he was actually doing in my class, Journey to the Sacred Male. Soon afterwards, he left the priesthood and he became a psychologist. He was drawn to shamanism, yet he was truly terrified, and that's his own words. He was terrified of doing this kind of work for fear he would relive his previous experience and crack up. He had wonderfully deep shamanic journeys, but because of his psychological training, he negated his experiences through his fears of splitting, psychosis, and the like. Even so, his journeys became stronger and more beautiful. Many times he would come back to the group looking transformed and radiant. The energy he emanated was tangible to all of us in the circle. The messages he received during his journeys were profound and healing, but the richer his journeys, the more frightened he became. To his credit, he showed up every week for the men's group, Journey to the Sacred Male. But after these profound experiences, he would diminish and discount them by labeling them neurotic and then processing his fear. He just could not get over the hump to believe he was not going nuts, but was actually accessing spiritual realities that were trying to help him. And it was evident to all of us in the circle that he was changing and transforming and spiritually growing, but also without him knowing it, he was integrating the shamanic journey work, the dream work, and the counsel work that we did weekly for 3 hours. He was actually integrating this. Back to my book, Dismemberment, Out with the Old and In with the New. And this is why I asked you to remember dismemberment. So the spirits took compassion on him and gave him a healing. They gave him a shamanic dismemberment by coming to him in the dream time. So he had a dream that the spirits came to him and they severed his head. They cut off his head and he saw his brains being eaten away. And although he experienced no pain, this profoundly disgusted him. By the way, this is classic shamanic healing work. And he didn't know this. He didn't know that this was a classic dismemberment. The spiritual worlds, or the helping spirits, the animal allies, they come and they show you a picture of dismembering you and eating parts of you, and sometimes dancing around you or throwing up parts of you, and then you see yourself being remembered. But this is how he experienced his dismemberment without knowing there was a thing called a dismemberment in the shamanic traditions. So in this way, the spirits took compassion on him and his overworked brain, which was trying to meld rigid psychological models to include a shamanic view, which was much vaster in scope. They simply took out his old brains and gave him new ones. It is a metaphor. He did not experience this brain removal in ordinary life, but it's also a reality in that it was a true shamanic healing that took place. This dismemberment got rid of old, outmoded patterns and beliefs and allowed him to interpret information differently. It opened up his ability to accept the spiritual world in new ways, rather than his psychological model that told him he was experiencing psychosis rather than direct spiritual revelation. So this is part of the dark night of the soul. This is a personal crisis where you descend like Inanna to the 7 or 9 levels into the center of the earth to either get killed or transform into gold. Holger Kalwit, in Dreamtime and Inner Space, calls this kind of dismemberment an essential part of the shamanic call. He writes about the ego self breaking down so that the true self can emerge, often through spiritual crisis, often through spiritual light, crisis, or collapse. I'm going to share a personal experience. When I was 28, I had a big spiritual experience, and this transformed my entire life. It transformed my dream time. It's when I became precognitive, and I was not studying shamanism at this time when I was 28. I was studying the Western mystery traditions, the Kabbalah, ceremonial magic, Wicca, and so forth. But this experience led me to study shamanism because I was trying to find out this one kind of dreamtime experience that I called in capital letters other. And the only one who actually answered that was Rudolf Steiner in How to Know Higher Worlds. But I want to say that through this process that happened to me of that spiritual experience, my old personality and behaviors were brought to light. They had to be worked through and to let go of. And this is extremely painful. And this isn't done in a Facebook soundbite. Oh, I'm changed. It's a process. It is a process day to day of reworking your soul, of dismantling old, limiting beliefs, and allowing yourself to be empty for a while. That is the challenge, especially in the West, to allow fallowness, to be unmoored, untethered, to not know, to stay in the unknowing long enough during a personal crisis or the dark night of the soul so that something new can arise. We cannot grasp onto something new until we have dismantled, like the Wicked Witch in the West, our double, our real old false persona, which in Native traditions they call the false face. So you might be asking, where does this term, the dark night of the soul, actually come from? And that was coined by St. John of the Cross, 1542. He was a Carmelite friar and priest. And frankly, it is very, very difficult, like Teresa of Avila's The Castle, to penetrate. But you can look up The Dark Night of the Soul. It's online. You can buy a book on it. You can listen to it on audio for free. So St. John of the Cross called it the holy unmaking. Isn't that great? The holy unmaking. These trials help you identify old limiting patterns for an authentic and creative self to be reborn. So we're moving on to the Western mystery tradition. So Rudolf Steiner in How to Know Higher Worlds, his definitive book, A Modern Path of Initiation, he says that at a certain point, the personality splits. He gave us the threefold human being in thinking, feeling, and willing. And he said you couldn't see this under a microscope, but every spiritual student at one point or another will have this splitting of the personality. And one of my teachers that I won't name in the consciousness study programs I've been in actually wrote their thesis on dreaming. And they experienced in a dream being three different parts. And they said it was a bit of a schizophrenic experience, but that was actually thinking, feeling, and willing they experienced. And they become separate, and you have to, through your own ego development, keep them together and go forward. So this is also part of the dark night of the soul. The organs of thinking, feeling, and willing become individualized. Their connection henceforth cannot be maintained by laws inherent in themselves, but must be managed by the awakening higher consciousness of the I in each human being. And that's Rudolf Steiner. And I'm going forward into Thomas Merton. The spiritual life is not a quiet escape, but a risk and a deep transformation. The false self must be left behind. Now, if we just take a look at the multi-billion-dollar strategy of commercials that have since the 50s become overwhelming prompts, prods, manipulations to almost force us to think of ourselves as less than, too fat, too thin, not pretty, that whatever we are is not enough. And this gets us on the hamster wheel of buying, buying, buying to be better, better, better. And the dark night of the soul is the dissolution of all these outmoded false personas. And the other interesting thing for me is I think the well-known actor, comedian, and painter, Jim Carrey, has experienced this. But watching his beautiful videos where he describes what has happened to him is actually, I don't want to say Christian, because then people will think, well, I'm not included if you're Buddhist or Islam or whatever. This is a human thing that happens. But in Christian terminology, it's called the no self. So you see where Steiner's in the Western mystery traditions, he's calling the loss of the personality. That would be no self. This means nothingness, to experience no thing, that your personality, who you think you are, this Kristena I being, isn't really me. And so Jim Carrey says, I needed to be completely broken. I don't believe in personalities. I believe we're energies flowing through the same body. And Carl Jung, in his Red Book, you must go into the dark. You must break into yourself. And one of my favorite books is Spiritual Emergency by Stanislav and Kristena Grof when they were married, called Spiritual Emergency When Personal Transformation Becomes a Crisis. And this is one of the first books to bring this conversation to a global audience, acknowledging spiritual crisis not as a pathology, but as an initiatory phase of personal and global transformation. And I think that we can consider spiritual pictures, they're like metaphors of what's going on. And we could see what's happening now, this crisis globally, the protests, the tremendous advent of conscience waking up globally. Have you ever experienced getting on social media and having people from the Ukraine or Mexico or Canada say, I'm so sorry for you Americans. We are with you. Our hearts are with you. We love you. I mean, I've never experienced that. I can't tell you how touched I am by this compassionate outreach for what's happening in the world. So what do you do? That would be the first question I would ask if I were you and you'd never heard of the dark night of the soul. First of all, it's not a light depression, and it's not even a depression. The dark night of the soul is a dismantling of your outer personality. It's when the soul knows when it's time to do the deepest dive of its life, one of them, because it does go on. Our life, it isn't just a one-time thing. And in alchemy, this is called the negrito, right? The darkness, the blackness, the nothingness that we have to dismantle. Now, if you're not religious and if you're not spiritual, this can be threatening. And many people refuse to do it, and they could refuse to do it their whole life long. But many people on their deathbed actually have spiritual realizations that they missed something because they are starting to move across the threshold and they're seeing other realities and they're realizing that they had a missed opportunity here. So I really urge you, first of all, you get mental help, mental health help. You get a therapist. You get a good therapist. You don't get someone who hasn't done any personal transformation on their own, right? So I'm going to bring out one of my favorite little stories about Carl Jung, which I've shared lots of times. So a woman called up Jung and said, I have to see you. I have to see you. I just have to see you. I have to make an appointment. I'm addicted to sugar. I've got to give up sugar. And Jung made an appointment in a month. And she got really angry. She said, what do you do? I need you now. I need you now. Why do I have to wait a month? What? Blah, blah, blah. So she had to wait a month. And in a month, when she came for the appointment, the first thing she said is, "Why did you make me wait a month?" And Carl Jung said, "I had to give up sugar. I had to give up sugar." That's the kind of therapist you want. How can he counsel somebody when he hasn't done the work? So you want to get a therapist who actually knows what the dark night is, or at least has even the psychological accoutrements of leading you through that, because it is shadow work. It's the devil. And this, remember, is series 3 in thought forms. So you can imagine what our thought forms are at this point in our life when we start the dark night of the soul. And I'm going to switch screens now because I'm dying to show you an artist that I love. And you remember, this is art and healing, right? So this is going to be I would say a thought form. When I look at this, I go, oh my God, this is a thought form. This is a fabulous picture of somebody who made something in the art world that shows me something different that I can leap from. Okay, let me change the screen. So this is Nick Cave, Nick Cave. And if you're listening to the podcast, you can look him up. So the one on my right is my picture of a human being spiritually with all their karma. We could rotate that around like Pigpen, Charles Schultz's Pigpen. That's a picture of us. That's me. Oh my God, that's me. That's probably what I look like with my karma. Like, look at all the interconnecting strands and beads and weavings and this and that and the other, and birds and little dolls and little connections. So that, for me, that's how, for an artist, I have to look at what I've studied my whole life and see, where can I find the pictures that resonate with that as a reality. And for me, Nick Cave's work is it's just perfection. It's got my vibe. It's funky. It's colorful. It's like pop art. It pushes the envelope. He's inside those. He creates them, and he's a dancer. And then the one on the left is, if we could see that full length, because he's tipping over, that this is, I'm sorry, it's just so great. I love Nick Cave. I would do this if I had a New York studio here in Santa Barbara. I would be doing this kind of work. So you see those pinwheels and spinning tops and probably Legos and who knows what else he's got balanced, because he has to, as an artist, he has to not only make the outfit on a danskin or probably a very thick leotard, because he's building layers. But then I wonder how he does the head frames. I'm sorry, I'm digressing from Dark Night of the Soul, but we want to consider, if we take this, obviously this isn't what we look like. We probably look far worse than this, with our spiritual karma rotating around us that a clairvoyant can see. But for me, I think our karma that we have to incur through our thoughts create thought forms. Our thought forms have will and feeling embedded in them. And then we do the deeds, and the deeds create the karma in the spiritual world, so that when we incarnate, we have to balance these karmic debts. So for me personally, and hopefully you can follow this, these are thought forms in our part 3 series on thought forms of the Dark Night of the Soul, of what we have to dismantle. What we have to dismantle. And it can't all come crashing down at once, because we couldn't handle it, and neither could our karma. It has to be done specifically, diligently, with equilibrium, with conscience. We have to have our conscience clear. What are we doing? What am I going to work on? So in the men and women's groups, Women's Spirit and Journey to the Sacred Male, and in the work that I do, I've been doing private counseling since the 90s. And if you want a private counseling session, you can book that at KristinaWestArt.com. Look under life coaching. That you pick one thing that you feel comfortable with dismantling and you really take a look at it. Now, I also have a class, I think it's up on Udemy, called Inner Work, and I have it at an extremely affordable price. So you can start your inner work journey using dismantling a certain aspect that you choose so it's safe for you and comfortable. And as you build this emotional muscle of working something, which is called cooking yourself in the negrito, in the cauldron, in the shit. Frankly, negrito is the shit in prima materia, that you have to go into the deep crap to start the work. So I hope Nick Cave gives you, I'll give you another picture. I'll put it behind me just so you can have a little bit more introduction to Nick Cave as an artist that I personally just love. He delights me. And this is another representation of, for me, it's like your community. It's like, this is probably what we look like together. This is probably what we look like together as a community. I don't know if you ever watched, one of my absolute favorite series is called The Detectorists. It's about mining for gold, and it's a marvelous modern fairy tale, won some BAFTA awards. And they used to talk about the Button Club. And this is sort of meaning it's all of us. This is what we all look like. And if we could do a workshop of creating our own Nick Cave-like costumes of our personal karma, and we could actually attach stories to it, couldn't we? And we could pick one and start dismantling it. And you can actually do art, therapeutic shamanic art practice in dismantling thought forms, which will actually work, and you'll change your life. So I'm going to give you one more Nick Cave. First, I want to introduce you. That is Nick Cave. He's giving a lecture probably at MoMA or something. But then I'm going to give you one more picture. Now, you might not know this, but I was a costume artist for summer solstice parade, which we get 120,000 people every year. And I was a costume and I was a float maker. And I mean, so Nick Cave, he's like up my alley. Makes me really happy. So this, you can just imagine, like you were a child again. Let's play. Just imagine this was real and that you are one of those beings seen spiritually. That's your accumulated thought form, and your thoughts have formed your karma because you've done deeds, right? So your thinking creates a thought form, your feeling creates a thought form embedded with feeling, and our will, when we do the act, also creates a heavier deed in the spiritual world, which goes to the sun realm, which is called the Akasha Chronicle. So just imagine that you're one of those. So look at this guy on the left. I mean, I don't even know what's going on there, but there's some dark deeds embedded, right? You got some light at the front, which we can't see. So we're sort of seeing the behind the scenes of his deeds. And then the one directly behind my head, you've got these lovely star patterns and star shapes. So you could ask yourself, what kind of thought forms are those? Maybe that life wasn't too difficult. Maybe he or she doesn't have to pay off a whole lot of retribution. We have another karmic being. And then if we still go over to the right, we have another one of his wonderful assemblage pieces. And it looks like there's two different, we're either seeing it's got a front and back together, which could be true, because it looks like the back of the legs, but it has an attachment of like a Betty Boop character in an Afghan sweater. Look at all that karma rotating around. So we can think about how beautifully intricate the spiritual worlds and the hierarchies have worked out, that our karma comes to us unconsciously. that we don't know it. But if we begin to wake up, especially in the dark night of the soul, and we start understanding the process is a normal human transformational process, we can pick one thing in our life that we would like to dismantle. This is a limiting pattern or belief, and just start there. So this is the end of series 3, Thought Forms, the dark night of the soul. When the light disappears, the path awakens. So I want to recap the dark night of the soul. I might have got lost. You get a therapist or get in a circle, get in a men's group circle that does the work. I mean, really, they do the work. They don't talk about doing the work. They're actually doing the work. Same for women. Get into a women's group. Get into a group that does personal development, counseling. You want to have a helper, and I could be that helper if you want to work with me. But there's tons of really good therapists out there, and that's what I would suggest to get you started and to hold you in your process. Now you're going to want to ask me questions like, how long does it last, Kristena? It's karmic. It's up to you, in that if you refuse it or in denial about it, or no, I'm not going to do that, you're just putting it off. And typically what happens then is what I call the Saturn squeeze. Life gets tougher, inner and outer tougher. So it's best to face into it and say, oh God, this might be happening. And get some books. Get Stanislav Grof's book on spiritual emergency as well. Jack Kornfield's book, After the Ecstasy, the Laundry, if you have had it in a spiritual experience, is a watershed book on processing spiritual experiences. So let's talk a little bit about the world dark night of the soul. Now, I'm not saying the whole world's going through a dark night of the soul, so don't quote me, but you can see collectively that we are going through a shattering experience due to the unraveling of American democracy, and how that is like a tidal wave moving through the world. However, we the people, and that's you and me, darling, we are the power. We are the overarching humanity loving people that are waking up to this calamity, that it is a real calamity. And we can't just put a plug in the hole in the dam. We have to move collectively around this and stop it, change it, and shift it. And we are doing that, but we need to be very active. So this is a deed-oriented karma. We need to be activating our deeds, our will. So that closes for the 3rd week of the series on thought forms. And I absolutely love sharing Nick Cave with you. He's one of my personal favorites of how I imagine how we walk around with our accumulated karma. And what happens when you can laugh about it? It lightens your heart. You go, okay, I'm human just like everybody else, and we all have this experience. And if you're going through the dark night of the soul, hon, it is a trial. It's actually a spiritual trial found cross-culturally. So you're part of a tribe, talk to your ancestors, start a dream practice. I've got all kinds of classes that you can find at Kristena West Art, but also free ones on YouTube, which outlines my entire esoteric dream practice that you can start for free. It's online. It's on my YouTube channel. So I'm trying to, with this new crisis, as I did in 2016 when I started podcasting, is to bring out what I would do in my men and women's groups as a lecture, because we would start this way, and then we'd do our shamanic work and council circle. So that's what this is. These vlogs are actually, this was from my book I wrote in 1998 from the men and women's circles that I was working with at that time, and the book came from the work. And it's a solid book. If you want to start your own community or men's group or women's group, it actually has in the back of the book how to start a group, and you have to be authentic. You can't do projections and I want to be the great teacher. That's part of dissolving that ego to a no space so you can actually hear what your participants are saying to you. Because if you're projecting all the time on what they're saying, there's no way you can hear them. Oh, I know what that person wants. Oh, I know. I want. You want to be a still lake to listen. And with that, I think we can be a still lake and listen to ourselves. So hopefully when you close off this vlog or the podcast, and if you're listening to the podcast, go on YouTube and take a look at Nick Cave's pictures, because it'll give you a chuckle and hopefully something to think about what our karma looks like. And the first person that did that in art, I think, was Charles Schultz with Pigpen. And if you ever see the series Grimm, is from the fairy tales, they're actually working with that idea that there is an animal inside of all of us. So this is something, thank God, that Carl Jung and the shamans have collectively it's been integrated into our thinking, into our fairy tales, into our worldviews. And it really will save the world to open up to world cultures and to speak the language of all peoples, which is a Whitsun impulse, is it not? So thank you so much for listening. If you are enjoying this ride with me, please hit subscribe with Kristena West Art, and also my website, Kristena West Art, where you can see my art, which I'm just starting to get together to get all my paintings up, but that's a process. But I have classes and all kinds of free stuff. So enjoy and please subscribe. Thanks so much. I'll see you next week. Series 4 on thought forms.